How do I get better decision making? Really important question, and it's one I heard today on my stream, which I loved. So here we are on YouTube because I felt like it'd be a great topic for us to discuss here too. So the knowledge problem is the first part of getting better decision making. The second part is the process problem. And so the process is the way we integrate the knowledge, we put it into our process, and that hopefully, if we've done it correctly, it's going to help us to actually make our decision making gains. Because you could have really good knowledge, like you could have radiant pro level knowledge of the game, but if you don't know how to integrate it into your process as a player, whereby you're making improvements to your decision making itself, you're not going to see the return in terms of your performance as a player. So it's not enough to just have really good knowledge. We have to know how to integrate it. And that's what the process part is about. So let's first talk about the knowledge problem. And by the way, the reason I use the word problem is because this is something we have to solve for. We have to solve for the question, how do we get better knowledge? So, there's a bit of a catch-22 here. It's tricky because if you have, let's say, gold level knowledge and you're like, okay, I want to improve my decision making. I'm going to analyze myself. I'm going to analyze pro players. I'm going to do all this. Well, it's really hard to actually do that because you have gold level knowledge. So you don't yet know what you don't know. So that's very challenging. You also don't necessarily know how to derive everything from first principles. This would be like the most advanced way and like the best way to do it. But it's really hard to have an understanding of first principles without having like a much deeper level of knowledge first. Because usually first principles are only going to be easy to discover once you have a shitload of knowledge. So we have to get the knowledge first. And so if we can't do so with first principles, if we can't do so because we don't have the understanding at the moment, how do we do that? So one of the best ways to do it is, and I'll give a couple, we'll go through about 2 or 3 ways to address this. So the first way is watching pro players. This is a great way to improve your knowledge because what you can do is you can go and ask the question, why are they doing the thing they're doing? So this is really helpful because what it means is we don't have to understand what they're doing. Instead, what we do is we say, okay, the jet pathed into the site on a hit like this. And now I'm going to ask myself all the questions as to why would the jet do it that way? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? What are the considerations? What is happening with all of the angles? What's happening with the fights? What's happening with Jet's teammates? How is this good for Jet, and what is the objective that Jet might have in this instance, or an objective more on the macro scale? Like what are they trying to achieve? You start asking all these questions, and by doing so, you can sort of reverse engineer the logic, and that's what we're looking for. That's the gem. That's the diamonds. It's the treasure in this exercise that we're looking to try to get. It's the logic, because once you've done this and you repeat this process over and over and over again, you start to accumulate more and more and more logic as to how the game works and how to make better decisions. And so, this logic that we're getting about how the jet paths into this particular site with the objectives and all these different things, that might now be some logic that's applicable in many other instances or scenarios on different maps in different situations. Because again, usually there are these underlying principles that kind of are in operation and that dictate like good decision making in most cases. So that's one way you can do it, is by kind of reverse engineering what you see the pros do. Ask yourself, why are they doing what they're doing? The next thing that you can do is by lifting stuff that the pros do and then just experiencing it as a player and then asking the questions there as well. So for example, you might see how a particular player like lurks with Viper or anchors with Viper, whatever it might be. The kind of utility they use, the timings, and just some of the positions, like these types of things. By experiencing this and just copying it directly, what you're able to do is live in their shoes a little bit, and you're able to experience what is good about this. Like, why is this good? Contrast it to what you were doing, and by experiencing it yourself, you can see, okay, here are the challenges with this. Here are the things that I struggled with. Here are the things that felt really good with this. You're starting to build up more logic. And the reason why this is cool is because you're actually able to kind of, by copying, you're able to be somewhere that you weren't going to be yourself, essentially, because you've taken this idea from somebody else. And so that allows you to experience things that would be out of the box thinking for you. So you're expanding your experience into areas that you wouldn't have by yourself. And so that's why copying others is really powerful, because you don't have to understand what you're copying. Just go and do it. And then hopefully in the action of doing it will allow you to understand a bit more. You don't have to understand everything, but what we're doing is we're trying to incrementally improve our understanding and our knowledge. And this also is helpful because you're getting some reps in actual application and integration of the knowledge into what you're trying to do. So that's the second way. So just recapping very quickly, we can reverse engineer stuff that we see. We can directly copy stuff that we see better players do. And there's a secondary point to this, which is cross-pollination. So if you do surround yourself with really good players, or with players that are maybe all better than you, or thereabouts, you're going to, through the cross-pollination, through kind of being in this environment, you're going to also have more advantages in terms of learning. This is really powerful as well. The next thing that is helpful for knowledge is, I would say, maybe a little bit more advanced. I suppose it depends on the person, but is trying to think in principles, because there are underlying principles behind pretty much everything. So I can give you some examples. So the first principle that you might notice, or you could think about, is thinking in advantage versus disadvantage. These are umbrella terms essentially, but everything is essentially derived from these things: advantage versus disadvantage. So we need to be on the lookout for these types of things. So what does that mean? So an example would be the player advantage. So I know that I have an advantage when I'm in, I have more players than the other team. And this is an advantage because obviously, if I'm in a fight, then they're gonna have a harder time killing more people than I have to kill. With more players, I can have setups, I can trade, I can, make these like very, very difficult fights for my opponent. This is clearly very advantageous to have more players, especially if it's executed correctly in an engagement. If you're in a situation where it's a 4v2, if you give the two players 1v1s, you're not actually leveraging your advantage, because you're not using all of the players you have in advantage. You're just giving them 1v1 fights. And if you're looking at what is the most least advantageous thing for your opponent, it is to get 1v1s. That's the only way you can win that scenario, most likely, is by preventing them from using the advantage of the numbers that they have. Because the use of that advantage correctly done is by actually having these good trade spacing, so that all four players are activated at once in the fight, and they're not separated. They're able to help each other actively in the fight, so that the numbers advantage is actually working for their favor. So, and it's important to think in these terms, because advantage and disadvantage really is everything to do with this game. So you can look at the Jet pathing example we took earlier. Jet might be pathing in such a manner that allows the Jet to take as much space as possible. By the way, this is one of Jet's jobs as a duelist, is to take space and then have that space then be taken by the teammates. So you have to hold this forward space as the Jet, which is why often you'll have the cloudburst, and the Jet will basically try to use the cloudburst to delay and create a scenario where a defender can't really just waste all their bullets on the smoke. Like, it's a really awkward scenario for the defender to deal with the cloudbursting dashing Jet. So it allows the Jet to take the space quickly with the dash, use the cloudbird to hold the space so that the teammates can then convert the space and hold it themselves afterwards, and then reinforce with the Jet. So you're looking at Jet now and thinking, okay, well, that's what that cloudburst is there to do. It's there to create delay and allow my teammates to take this extra space. So that's an interesting concept, the concept of delay, because that's also an important principle on the defense as well. The longer you can delay your opponents in trying to hit the site, the more time your team has to have better positioning. You can convert the delay into better positioning for your team. So another sort of like overarching principles we're thinking of. Similarly, the Jet also might be pathing in such a way that the Jet is minimizing Jet's exposure to, let's say, more than one angle at a time. So Jet doesn't have to take too much risk. So it's the most space gained as quickly as possible, with also the most minimal risk. Now, it could also be the case that in certain hits, the Jet might be set up with layered utility to actually get kills. That's also a possibility as well. It's really up to you to kind of to figure that out based on what you see. But, again, if we look at some of these principles, we can learn a lot. We can really learn a lot about, you know, more situations than just the one that we're seeing. And this is also a concept that some may call fractal. You know, a fractal is something that is like a repeating pattern. And essentially here, you know, we have repeating principles that operate in other areas of the game too. So looking at the game from more of a principle viewpoint is really key. So trying to build that understanding where you can is really, really cool, because it allows you to spot these patterns and make better choices. And similarly, you know, it's also important to understand some of the fundamentals, because we talked about advantage versus disadvantage. So you do need to have an understanding as to angles, how they work. Like, what is a good angle? What is a bad angle? And why? You know, what is good cover? You know, what is a good fight? What is a bad fight? Like, you need to have the ability to assess these things. And the reason is because, as I'll now switch, you know, to the other part, is that's very key in the process part. Because the process part, where we are looking to integrate the knowledge, we're also looking to understand actively what we're doing, and to use that as a cue to know how to improve, like where the mistakes are. So the process part is, I would say there's three parts to it. There is the kind of pre-performance part, there is the performance part, and then there's the post-performance part of the process. So, you know, process is kind of an ambiguous term. You know, it essentially just means what all the things that you're doing repeatedly as part of your, you know, your daily practice time, your allotted practice time to get better. So, you know, your process to get better might look like, okay, I'm gonna, you know, do some aim training, then I'm gonna do like some skills work, and then some aim training, you know, warm up in the aim training, then I'm gonna do some DM, and then I'm gonna do, you know, like 2 or 3 DMs. I'm gonna do the DMs this way, and now this is like 45 minutes of my warm up, and then now I'm gonna go into the game, and I'm gonna go, you know, play 4 ranked games and blah blah blah. And then afterwards, you're like, okay, now I'm gonna review some things, and I'm gonna watch a VOD, like whatever it might be. So this is like your process, like whatever it is that you're repeating to get better, basically, your process. So when it comes to the, you know, the integration of this knowledge, we have to have a process that's helping us make better decisions and making us be more intentional and deliberate with our choices to begin with. So first of all, you know, I would say that decision making can get really out of hand when you're very tired. So my advice is always to make sure that you don't play when you're really fatigued, because you'll be making mistakes. But what you want to do is you want to have, before you play, you want to have your focuses in mind for the day. When you're actually playing, you want to be always asking yourself the question after you died: is it a good fight? Is it a bad fight? Would I have made the same decision? You know, that's really an important question. Trying to have some, even though it's like very minimal distance from the engagement, try to get into the habit of sort of as objectively as possible asking yourself, would I have made the same decision? Was it a good fight? Was it a bad fight? What are other things I could have done? You know, asking yourself these questions is really important, because you might actually strike on one of these principles. This happened to me today, actually, when I was even talking about this concept with the stream. I took a fight where it was actually like a really good fight. Like, I created an advantageous fight for myself, and then I lost the fight. And then I thought for a second, I was like, hang on, would I do this again? And I looked at the situation. I'm like, actually, I would not have. I would not have done this again, even though I created a better, like a advantageous fight, I didn't use the numbers advantage. If I had used the numbers advantage, that would have been the correct thing to do. And so that's actually kind of tricky. That's kind of advanced, because you're having to have this principle that's kind of overriding something that does actually create an advantage. So I was actually still putting myself in a good spot, but I just didn't put myself in the most optimal spot. And being able to recognize that stuff is really key. And especially when it's something as principle as a numbers advantage, I have to have in my head, that's such a big deal. Numbers advantage, you like the whole flow of the match, especially if you're looking at pro matches, operates from numbers advantage. It's very key in how a lot of decisions are made at the top level and in general. So I was like, whoa, I'm making a big fundamental error here. What I have to do is I'm going to just like focus on this. This is going to be my main focus throughout, the day and throughout probably the next week at least of practice, because it's a big concept. So now, we're in this process where I'm like, okay, now every time I'm going to be looking at my engagements, I'm going to be thinking about, okay, one, am I doing well with this particular principle? And then secondly, I'm thinking, what can I do differently that would allow me to better habituate this principle. And so the one thing was, before any engagements take place, if I'm expecting an engagement, always quickly, glance at the top of the screen, check how many players are alive. What is the status on numbers and what is the status on position? Those are the two most important things I need to check for. So that's what I'm currently actually working on, is trying to improve that, so I can become a better player and make more better decisions more consistently to get, because you're getting these extra 1 or 2 rounds out of this kind of thing, and that has a resounding impact on your ability to actually rank up and be a better player in general. So there you go. So making sure that you to recap after each engagement, after each death, each round, would I have made that decision again? And this is something that you need to do, not just for things where you die, but also situations that go well, because it can be the case that you can, this is a poker reference for those of you that play poker, you can be there with 2-7 offhand, which is the worst hand in poker, and you can win against aces, but it doesn't mean that your decision was good. It means that you kind of lucked out, so you can have these false positives where you might feel like, oh, nothing went wrong there because I got the outcome I wanted. But we're trying to rewire our brains a little bit so that we can get better decision making, because the outcome is misleading. So we want to instead judge ourselves for the objective decision, regardless of the outcome. So the outcome should only help to inform us in so far as is reasonable, to allow us to get some extra information to still be objective about whether it was good or not. Because there's lots of spots that are have good outcomes, but they're actually bad decisions. So the next part of the process is, what do you do in your post performance with regards to this? And I would say that, it's important to really just understand what you how you feel about the good or bad decisions that you made. Can you recall any, writing some of them down, noting them down can be helpful for this particular process. But even spending as little as 5 minutes just thinking about the things that you feel like you should have done differently, or the things that you feel like struck you, like for example, this numbers advantage thing, it struck me. Because what we want to do is we want to create a world where our attention is going on to these new focuses, these things that we've noticed about our play. Because that act of just having that extra attention, that extra focus, will allow us to slowly guide ourselves towards better outcomes with these things. And then when you get to the next day of practice in your sort of pre-performance thing, that's another time to try to recall some of the things from the previous session. So the next time I play, the biggest thing I'm going to recall is I'm going to recall the numbers advantage, and then try to reinforce this process that I'm going to glance at the minimap / the top of the screen to figure out position and numbers, so that I can make a better decision in some of these fights, when I'm expecting a fight at the very least, on a retake or whatever it might be. And that kind of stuff is huge, because if you delay maybe 5 seconds, maybe you've bought enough time for a teammate to be in a better position. That actually changes the face of the round, as opposed to in this case, if I didn't check that and I have no idea where my teammates are, and I rush into a fight and I don't allow them to be able to help me, and then there's a worse outcome. So this is actually a big leak that I have right now that I'm trying to address. You're going to find probably similar things. So make sure that you make a note of these things, you recall them, you keep bringing these things to mind, and you keep track of this. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create I haven't decided exactly how I'll execute it yet, but a spreadsheet or some kind of way to categorize different skills and kind of help people basically understand their progress with these skills, so that you can also select for certain focuses. So you can always have several focuses throughout the weeks that you're playing, so that you can, again, keep your attention in the areas you wish to improve. If you just sit down and play and you don't have really any intention, because you don't have this process of analyzing every time you've made decisions, are those decisions good or bad? Even if you're doing that, are you actually taking any meaningful focuses away from that time? We want to be making sure that we are always kind of focused on improving small parts of our game. It is through doing that we'll eventually have big improvements, because all these small edges will add up, and in a couple months, you'll have really big jumps in performance. And that's generally how it will work. And people tend to get stuck with their decision making, because either they have a bad process that doesn't work, or they don't put any effort into the knowledge, or they just don't have any intention when they're playing. So these are some of the biggest issues that people have. And I've talked for about 20 minutes now on this topic, so I'm just going to recap very quickly one last time. Better decision making comes down to increasing your knowledge and then integrating that knowledge into your process. So going into your playing days with some of the focuses you've taken from the study that you've done or the analysis that you've done, bringing that into the game that you're playing, and on top of that, making sure that when you're playing, you have this process by which you say after each decision you've made, like after you've died or you know, at the beginning of the next round, would I have done that again? You know, what was good about that? What was bad about that? You know, even though it was a good outcome, was it a bad decision? Am I being objective about these things? Would I have done something different? And that is the metric of success, not the outcome. So that's the recap. So I hope this video was in some way helpful or informative. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And you know, I would be very happy to keep making content around this topic. I think it's quite a challenging one, yet it is a massive one in terms of getting better as a player. So with that said, I appreciate your viewership. Subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on the next one.